I've been crucified with Christ. I've been crucified with Christ. I no longer live, but Christ lives in me.
Today's lesson, the Apostolic Doctrine of Eschatology, Part 6, is a continuation of Contextual Inconsistencies. It's long been a traditional teaching by the church that when Jesus comes back, when Jesus returns, everything that can be shaken will be shaken. And this is referred to in the book of Hebrews by most churches today in chapter 12. But when you notice what it says in chapter 12, verse 26, you find something different.
Whose voice then shook the earth. But now he hath promised, saying, Yet once more I shake not the earth only, but also heaven.
This great shaking that is supposedly going to happen when Jesus comes back, if you will notice the scriptures, it first happened 1,500 years before Jesus Christ came into this world at the foot of Mount Sinai. The voice of God shook the earth and the heaven, and it was at the giving of that first Old Covenant at Mount Sinai in Exodus chapter 19, verses 18, 19, and 20.
And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long, and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. And the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai, on the top of the mount. And the Lord called Moses up to the top of the mount, and Moses went up.
In the giving of that first covenant, the Bible said that everything was shaken. The voice of God was there. The people of Israel heard the voice, and they feared exceedingly. So this shaking is something that God himself was responsible for. In the book of Joel, chapter 3, in verse 16.
The Lord also shall roar out of Zion, and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth shall shake. But the Lord will be the hope of his people, and the strength of the children of Israel.
When you read something that's being shaken by the voice of God, it is normally a day of judgment, a day of wrath. And this voice that shook so many times in the relationship that God had with the 12 tribes of Israel, we find getting ready to take place in the end times, in the last days of the first century relationship of the old covenant God had with Israel. In Haggai chapter 2 and verse 6 and 7.
For thus saith the Lord of hosts, Yet once it is a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth, and the sea and the dry land. And I will shake all nations, and the desire of all nations shall come. And I will fill this house with glory, saith the Lord of hosts.
It was a great day of shaking. It was going to take place at the arrival, the return of the Lord Jesus Christ. He is the desire of all nations. So this is a prophecy that was spoken of in the Old Covenant and was going to take place in the last days. In Isaiah chapter 13 and verse 13.
Therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall remove out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger.
It was to be a day of judgment in that first century, in AD 70. Everything that was that could be shaken was shaken. Everything that was connected to that old covenant was simply removed. And a new covenant was getting ready to take place. Only the kingdom that was going to be coming was a kingdom that was never going to be shaken. It was going to be an everlasting kingdom. It was going to be a dominion that had no end. When you examine all of the scriptures, that speak about a great shaking. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 27.
And this word, yet once more, signifieth the removing of those things that are shaken, as of things that are made, that those things which cannot be shaken may remain.
What was saying there is everything that was connected to the old covenant that God had with the nation of Israel was removed. The city of Jerusalem was desolate. The temple that the Jewish people had so long been connected to God with was destroyed. All of the elements were burned. Everything that had to do with the instruction by the priesthood, everything was completely taken away and removed with a covenant that could never be removed, that could never be shaken. That's what we're reading about when we read in Hebrews chapter 12. You see that the things are shaken, they are to be replaced by something that could never be shaken, the New Testament. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 28, we see a new kingdom that could not be moved. That kingdom was tethered to God and was not shakable. When did it arrive? It arrived in AD 70. When Jesus returned in AD 70, he brought that new covenant. He instituted that new covenant.
Wherefore, we receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace, whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear.
This kingdom was not going to be taken away. It was always going to be there. So the reference to the fact that it was a new kingdom, a new covenant, a new agreement that God had made, one that would last forever. The judgment of God was coming on the nation of Israel in AD 70. It was in the last days. It was in the last days of the old covenant that God had with the 12 tribes of Israel at Sinai. Everything was about to end. And in AD 70 of the first century, that new covenant and that new kingdom was to begin, one that would never end or be shaken. That was the eternal, everlasting kingdom of the Lord Jesus Christ. He consummated that kingdom when he returned in AD 70. In Daniel chapter 4, verse 34, it tells us again of a dominion, of a kingdom that would never end.
And at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me. And I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation.
And in Luke chapter 1, verse 33, we see it mentioned again about a dominion and kingdom that had no end.
And he shall reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there shall be no end.
So this is something that's always been taught. It's a traditional teaching that Jesus will come back one day with 10,000s of his saints. And it's always been taught that these are the resurrected people that obeyed the gospel and that were born again. But when you look at all the scriptures, the problem, when you have inconsistent contextual consistency, it's only because bits and pieces of scriptures are spoken of. It's like building a foundation on sand. You have to look at everything. It's only after everything, all the scriptures have been examined on any particular subject, that you can get a true, consistent, contextual teaching. So today we've discovered that there's not going to be a great shaking. There's not going to be a great last end of the world judgment. These things have already taken place. They have already been fulfilled prophetically almost 2,000 years ago. When you look to the future, you are looking at an imaginative portrayal. Every time something happens, they write a book or they make a movie. It's all because they refuse to look to the past to find the answers to their questions. The future is filled with inventive theology. So if you have an input, a question, a comment, you can email us at the New Covenant Apostolic Church at gmail.com.
I've been crucified with Christ. I've been crucified with Christ.